All right, the day after tonight, we are going to break down all the highlights and the lowlights from last night's elections.
But there are still some races that haven't been called yet, like Arizona's Senate race, which only has 66% of the ballot counted so far.
Plus, we saw a lot of new faces win those races last night and even flip some seats for the Republicans. Florida Congresswoman-elect Ana Paulina Luna, Texas Congresswoman-elect Monica De La Cruz, and Oklahoma Senator-elect Mark Wayne Mullen all will be here fresh off their victories. Spicer & Company starts right now. Well, good Wednesday evening. I hope you got some sleep. It was a late night, early morning. It's the day after election night. We are happily more than halfway through the work week, already looking forward to the weekend. Welcome to Spicer & Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
And I'm Lindsay Keith. Isn't that true? We're coming to you live from our New York City studio, and we are just hearing President Biden moments ago delivering an unscheduled speech, Sean, at the White House on last night's midterms. Let's listen in.
As I have throughout my career, I'm going to continue to work across the aisle to deliver for the American people. And it's not always easy, but we did it the first term. Now, I'll be surprised a lot of people that we signed over 210 bipartisan laws since I've become president.
All right. I think the interesting thing about this speech, Sean, it was not scheduled. He's supposed to be going to Bali today, but I actually don't think he was planning on having this speech if Democrats did poorly.
Well, it's been a tradition. Every president has done it the day after election.
Yeah, but
they just refuse to schedule it. It is part of the tradition that every president does. Trump did it, Obama didn't, Clinton did it, Bush did it. Everybody does it. They had just, and the White House Correspondents Association had been on him saying, hey, why haven't you put it on your schedule? They leaned into it saying, you know, we'll probably do something. I think they were waiting to see how it went. But exactly. They were going to, and they knew that they couldn't get away with going overseas without talking to the press and addressing this. But I think they felt like they were in a good place to come out and, you know, get them to say something.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is a lot to break down from last night. A lot of people woke up scratching their head this morning, Sean.
Oh, yeah. I don't think it was the night that a lot of Republicans and a lot of pollsters thought it was. But there were some bright spots. I want to give you a couple of my big takeaways. First and foremost, the Biden legislative agenda has come to an end. Republicans will take the majority in the House, which puts a pin in the Biden agenda. The importance of this cannot be understated. The committees, the power of the purse, the legislative agenda is all now flipped. It is not going to be as it was. This is crucial. For as disappointed as some people may be in the outcome last night, this is what you need to focus on. And by the way, another big symbolic win. The chairman of the Democrats campaign committee in the House, Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney of New York, he lost his seat last night. This is the first time a DCCC chair has lost since the 1980s. Now, Florida was also a very good night for Republicans. Governor Ron DeSantis won re-election. A lot of new faces in the House coming from Florida as well. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But DeSantis did well through South Florida. He did well with Hispanics throughout the state, not just among the Cuban community. And if you think about it, the past several statewide races, governor, senator, president, have all been rather nail-biter type races. But DeSantis and Marco Rubio in that key Senate race were both big wins for the Republicans.
Absolutely. I think two of my big takeaways, one is abortion. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. Yep. But exit polling showing that 27% of people said that's why they went to the ballots last night. That's just narrowly behind the economy, which was at 31%. I think this Republicans missed the boat on talking about this. They said, no, it's only the economy, so we don't need to talk about it. But people can care about more than one issue. Right. I think they did care about economy, number one, but abortion was clearly very close behind that as a number two. I think people were also silent about that, maybe weren't honest in some of those polls. And then here's another thing. I think when we look at the two de facto leaders of the parties right now, President Biden, who we just heard from, and former President Trump, who was on our show last night, the final run-up to last night's election, we saw Biden out on the campaign trail talking about what? The importance of democracy. Democracy is in peril. And what did he also do? He painted Trump supporters as this threat to democracy. It's to be terrible. Election deniers on the ballot. We can't let these people win at the end of the day. Then you had President Trump out reminding people that he wants to be on the ballot in 2024, just the night before the midterms. I think those swing voters, we talk about that white suburban woman that looked like they were going to swing over into the Republican column, who Democrats got heavily in 2018. I think that scared them a bit. If those speeches weren't so closely timed, Sean, I don't think that we would have had the same outcome potentially. I do think that, obviously there's so much more to analyze on that as we see those numbers, but I think that scared a lot of people.
Well, he scared a lot of the liberal base. They said, you got to go out there and vote.
And those
they were
voters.
maybe apathetic, maybe weren't as excited to go out and vote. We saw that voter enthusiasm gap tighten up, and that's because I think the Democrats did a good job of scaring their base, scaring them on abortion, scaring them on democracy, because they had nothing else. But last night was also a big night for incumbents, who are historically hard to beat at any level. And we had a number of new diverse candidates running in the Republican Party. We've had a ton on the show. But incumbency does matter. There's a lot of trappings that come with office, especially, think about a governor, right? Like DeSantis in Florida, who came out of this historic hurricane. He managed to do really, really well with the managing of the preparation of it and the aftermath of it. And think about how he handled COVID. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. And I think we saw a lot of incumbents win last night. And as you know, historically, incumbents do better. It's hard to beat an incumbent, especially with a lot of the new names that we saw on the ballot from the Republicans last night. I do want to look at some of these races, just go over them. In the Senate, let's start with Pennsylvania. This was a surpriser for many. Democrat John Fetterman beating out Republican Dr. Mehmet Oz. Pretty tight race, 50% to 47%. Many people thought that we wouldn't know this for many days, so it was a shocker that we saw Oz conceding to that last night, and it was called for Fetterman. And then turning to Georgia, that race is now headed to a runoff. We will be talking about this one for a while until December 6th. Raphael Warnock there, the incumbent, 49.4% to Herschel Walker's 48.5%.
I'm going to say this. If you live in Georgia, you better buy a bigger turkey, because you're going to have a lot of people camping out at your house for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, maybe the Obamas.
Everybody is going to be in
Winfrey,
Georgia for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, hanging out there. And also, I will say, interesting, the Libertarian there, Chase Oliver, he got 2%, so that really messed things up for both of those candidates. And then we saw in New Hampshire, Democrat incumbent Senator Maggie Hassan beat Don Bolduc. Maggie Hassan, 53.8% to Don Bolduc, 44.2%. Shaw, this is one we thought would be closer. We saw the polls kind of trending, it seemed like, in Bolduc's way, close enough. This was, I think, much wider than people expected to be. But, you see Hassan, who completely separated herself from Biden. Right. I think it helped her there. And then finally, Arizona. It hasn't been called yet. Incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly, 51.4% to Blake Masters, 46.4%. This is a seat that Republicans do need to flip there in that state.
But those numbers don't look good for Blake Masters. I hate to say it. Obviously, a lot to still count, just to be clear. There's a lot to still count. So I'm not saying it's, but that's a lot of ground to make up. So
it is. Also, Mark Kelly, somebody who separated himself from Biden, another person.
Yep.
There was also a number of so-called sleeper races that we thought would be super close, but they weren't. Polling had some of these candidates within a couple points of each other, and some ended up losing by double digits. We're going to talk to pollster Spencer Abrahams a little later in the show to talk about some of those, but I'm excited to get his take.
Also, what went wrong?
What went wrong ultimately, and who got it right, who got it wrong. So a lot to break down there.
Yeah, turning to the House, though, you think about some of the key races there. Democrats flipped Republican-held House seats in Ohio and Michigan and managed to hold on some of those vulnerable seats that we talked about in Virginia and elsewhere. Democrat Greg Landsman beat Republican incumbent Steve Chabot in Ohio's 1st District. Some people saw that thing coming. That wasn't that unexpected. But then you start to look at Democrat Joyce Beatty who beat Republican Lee Stahey in Ohio's 3rd District, 70.2 to 28. That was a big whooping there. Incumbent Democrat Marcy Kaptur beat Republican J.R. Majeski, who was endorsed by Trump. Remember, Majeski's the guy who sort of exaggerated, lied about his military record. Republicans had abandoned him. This was a seat that they hoped they picked up. That clearly hurt him there. And then if you move over to Michigan, 7th District, incumbent Democratic Alyssa Slotkin beat Republican Tom Barrett, who had just been on the show. Republicans really felt bullish on this race. But Republican 7th District, that Northern Virginia district that was going to be a real tell, I thought, incumbent Democrat Abigail Spanberger beat Republican Yelsey Vega. Spanberger won by 4 points, so they kept it tight. I think that does speak well to the Republicans' effort there. But they really wanted that one bad.
Yeah. I do want to move to the governor's races. It was interesting to see how incumbents, particularly Republicans, we're talking about these incumbents, performed in states that we saw these massive migrations, Sean, after and during the pandemic. I want to start with Florida, where incumbent Republican Governor Ron DeSantis beat Democrat challenger and former Florida governor, at the time, Republican, Charlie Crist. DeSantis there, 59.4%, Crist 40%, almost a 20% margin. And then moving to Texas, incumbent Republican Governor Greg Abbott beating Democrat challenger Beto O'Rourke. Abbott 54.8%.
Yeah, I think they're going to form a new firm together. O'Rourke, Abrams, and then I think they're going to try to get Charlie Crist involved.
I just wonder what O'Rourke's going to run for next. I think that's
condo
the question.
board.
Condo board.
He'll lose there too.
I do want to move to Georgia, another red state. Republicans incumbent Governor Brian Kemp beating Democrat challenger Stacey Abrams. A rematch there. Kemp 53.4%, Abrams 45.8%. Here's the interesting thing on that. In 2018, that was very close as a 2% race. So I think you see Kemp, he ran on a record how well he was able to run the state during COVID. And Abrams still running on voter suppression, as we talked about yesterday, and abortion. So I'm actually kind of surprised she didn't do better on that. But maybe on that issue, it would have been even wider. And then the race in Arizona, of course, has not been called yet. It's still very close with Democrat Katie Hobbs in the lead slightly with 50.3% and Republican Carrie Lake at 49.7%.
Yeah, we're going to break this one down a little bit later in the show because there's a lot that went on there we'll get to later.
That's right. And then in Michigan, Democrat incumbent Governor Gretchen Whitmer beat Republican Tudor Dixon. Gretchen Whitmer, 54.5%, Tudor Dixon, 43.9%. Again, abortion was on the ballot in that state, and Whitmer ran very heavily on that. And I do think that's what put her over the edge because she really performed terribly during COVID. But I think another point is, Sean, we kind of alluded to this yesterday. You had people moving out of the state in droves, and it's probably the Republicans who moved out of the state to Florida, and that's why you see the surge with DeSantis.
This is the first time you think about this. DeSantis did much better, right? And Zeldin didn't do as well. And I think that there's a lot of that can be attributed to how many people moved in COVID. This is the first time that you've seen the manifestation of that reallocation of the vote. That's important here because no one knew how that was going to play out post-COVID. I think we saw the results of that last night.
Absolutely. And then in New York, we had Kathy Hochul, the incumbent, against Lee Zeldin. Many people were in New York right now so disappointed at that loss from Lee Zeldin. People saying, I'm moving out of New York. He did. 5 points. And that is within the margin of error because many polls had him within 2, margin error 2 or 3. So those were kind of accurate, actually.
Yeah. There were a bunch of those bright spots, right? I mentioned Elaine Luria. She was a big Republican pickup in Virginia. I do want to take a moment, though, to congratulate my former deputy, White House Press Secretary, Arkansas Governor-elect Sarah Sanders. She beat her Democratic challenger 63-35. Another great spot of brightness there. So congratulations, Sarah. She's going to be a great governor.
All right. Congratulations, Sarah. All right. Well, coming up, once again, polls leading up to yesterday's election showing one thing, but the results showing something else. So where were the pollsters wrong? We're going to get the scoop from pollster Spencer Abrams. That's after the break.